Hi everyone, welcome to Aware of the Ancients YouTube channel. My name is H-Bomb, and I am going to tell you the story, the mythology, of Medusa. So let's get into it, shall we? I'm reading this from my phone, so excuse that my line of vision goes back and forth a little bit. Bear with me, because it's a great story. The legend of Medusa, like many legends, has been altered and mangled and wrung through the wringer of many different versions of truth. But this one is mine, so I will tell you the story that I have pieced together from the many versions of the legends I've come across. Medusa was one of the three gorgeous Gorgon sisters of the deep waters. There, the sisters resided with the creepier creatures of the deep sea. Medusa was the only mortal of the three sisters and was one of the most beautiful women of her time, with gorgeous locks of long, flowing, fire-red hair. She loved to come to the surface of the waters to sun herself on the rocks and sing. Her voice was said to be like honey flowing, as it was so sweet to hear, and when she would sing surrounded by the rocks, her voice would be amplified, sometimes attracting sailors away from their course as they could not resist her song. One day, while sunning herself and singing her songs, she caught the ear of the god of the sea, Poseidon. In Roman mythology, he's known as Neptune. When Poseidon went looking for who possessed such a beautiful vocal instrument, he found Medusa and immediately fell in lust with her in all of her perfect beauty. Poseidon was espoused to Minerva, who in Roman history is Athena, the most beautiful of all the goddesses. But he could not resist Medusa's beauty, and he pursued her endlessly and recklessly. Medusa, however, was not lured in by Poseidon, as she knew Minerva was his wife, and no one could compete, or wanted to compete with the likes or the looks of Minerva. Regardless, Poseidon was determined to have his way, and have his way he did, forcing himself on Medusa on Minerva's altar when Medusa was in Minerva's temple to present offerings to the goddess. When Minerva found out that Medusa had relations with Poseidon, she didn't ask how it went down, she just set out revenge on Medusa, as she knew Medusa's beauty was a definite rival to her own, especially when it came to the eyes of Poseidon. Minerva cast a spell on Medusa, turning her fiery red locks into snakes, graying her skin and sharpening her teeth to match that of the sea monsters where she dwelled. Minerva furthered the curse by adding in that any mortal who looked upon Medusa's face would be turned to stone immediately, leaving Medusa to be alone for the rest of her days. Needless to say, Medusa's goodness and purity were crushed by Neptune's taking advantage of her. And multiplied by the curse put on her by Minerva's revenge, Medusa turned to the dark side. And she returned to the depths of the dark waters, becoming known as the Queen of the Sea Monsters. She set out to take her own revenge on any man who dared come close to her or her murky underwater lair. And many ships set anchor close to where Medusa's underwater lair was, as it was at the head of a strait that led to the open sea. Medusa used her gift of melody to lure sailors close to her lair, and when they got close enough, she would turn her melody into an ear-shattering screech and arise out of the water in her snaky gray fanged glory. The sailors would immediately be stunned and turned to stone, falling to the bottom of the ocean, never to be seen again. Side note: the word Gorgon in Greek means grim or terrible, and the word Medusa means guard or protector. So putting this together, Medusa is the guardian protector of the grim and terrible that lurks in the deep watery depths. Again, there are many ways the tale is told, but Perseus, the great warrior of the Perseus constellation that the Perseus constellation is named for, was one of the greatest swordsmen and warriors in Greek mythology. However, Perseus was never meant to be born, as his mother Danae had been locked away in a tower by Acrisius, king of the Argos, because of a prophecy that Danae were to ever give birth, an eventual grandson would slay because of a because of a prophecy that if Danae were to ever give birth, an eventual grandson would slay Acrisius. When Zeus heard of this, he visited Danae in the tower in the form of a golden rain and impregnated Danae. When Acrisius found Danae in the tower with a new baby, he put Danae and the baby, Perseus, into a chest, locked it, and threw it into the sea in order to kill them both. However, the chest washed up on the shores of Seriphos, and that is where Danae and Perseus made their home. Seriphos was ruled by King Polydectes. When Polydectes eventually met Danae and the young Perseus, he immediately fell for Danae. But Perseus was very protective of his mother and consistently blocked the advancements the king would try to make on his mother. King Polydectes was also betrothed to another woman named Hippodamia, and this gave Perseus even more reason to protect his mother from the king's desires. As Perseus grew up and into his role as a warrior, he wasn't around his mother as often, and the king took advantage of this. However, Perseus continued to thwart the king, and the king Polydectes was growing tired of Perseus's constant interference, so he set up a plan to get rid of Perseus once and for all. King Polydectes arranged for a banquet to be thrown in honor of Hippodamia, and invited everyone who was anyone in the kingdom, asking that they bring Hippodamia a gift. However, the invitation to Perseus was altered, and he showed up to the banquet empty-handed. When he realized he was out of order, he pleaded to the king to allow him to make it right. The king offered retribution to Perseus by offering him a quest to retrieve the head of Medusa and bring it back to him, assuming that this task could never be accomplished, and therefore Perseus would be out of the picture for good, and Polydectes could wed Perseus' mother without any questions. So, Perseus set off to complete the decapitating task. He was assisted by the gods Athena, Hermes, and Hades in this quest, as they knew he was sent out by the king in hopes of failing to return. They prepared Perseus with etheric gifts of invisibility, winged sandals, and an adamantine sickle, a bronze shield, and a kibyssus, which is a magically bound bag to store Medusa's head in. Perseus, armed with these gifts from the gods, found Medusa in her deep, dark depths. Being the brilliant warrior that he was, he turned his back to her, and using the reflection in his shield to calculate his blow, he cut the head off of Medusa in one spinning swing of the sickle. Her sisters woke during the ruckus, but because Perseus had the gift of invisibility and winged sandals, they could not see him, and he quickly escaped with the head of Medusa. There are other versions of the story, as it has been through a menagerie of recreations over the thousands and thousands of years, but all of them lead back to the beheading of Medusa, leading to the name of Algol, because its location is at the head of Medusa, and it is technically 3 stars, representing the 3 sisters of Gorgon. And here I am going to end the myth of Medusa and how she was beheaded. And if you would like to learn further about the star Algol, in the Perseus constellation, please feel free to check out my Aware of the Ancients channel on Substack. You can find it at substack.com/Aware of the Ancients. Thanks for joining me for this mythological story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it piqued your interest, and I hope you'll look further into some Greek mythology, because it's truly, truly fascinating, and it doesn't ever seem to end. So, until we meet again, friends, have yourselves a wonder-filled day. See you later.